Hello and welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legalbytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. All righty, let's get into it indeed. Welcome, guys. Happy Wednesday. Yes, it is Wednesday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. How you guys doing? How's everybody doing? We are halfway through the work week, and I am so happy to see all of you guys. Obviously, today, if you saw the thumbnail, you saw the title, you know that today's subject is a bit of a heavier kind of day. I posted about this on all of my social media channels, asking what people thought, what people wanted to hear about, if they wanted to hear about this case at all, if they were interested, not interested. And one of the things that I started to hear from people was, yes, generally speaking, I'm interested, but I'm also concerned about the possibility that a subject like this can turn very cheap very quickly. And I totally understand that. So of course, what I'm talking about is the lawsuit filed by Vanessa Bryant for over the photos that were taken of the helicopter crash site where Kobe Bryant and Gianna Bryant and other people died very suddenly. There were some photos that were taken by members of the LA County Sheriff's Department, members of the LA County Fire Department. And so that is what this lawsuit is all about. I will get into some more of the other litigation that's been going on surrounding his death and just sort of some background stuff, and just to kind of give you guys a bit of a bit of context for where this case is coming up and where it exists. And then I'll get into the actual complaint in the case, and then maybe a little bit, if there's some time, I'd like to go into some of like the pretrial stuff that's been coming up, because this case is set for trial it was originally set for trial for later this month, but it has been moved back to at least mid-August, late August. It's kind of unclear from the reporting, kind of unclear from what I've been able to get from the docket as well. But I think that maybe the parties don't exactly know the specific date is what it sounds like. Now, another thing about this case is that it is obviously very emotionally charged. It is very easy to look at this case and be like, ooh, absolutely disgusting, shameful, terrible behavior. I in this particular case, in cases like this, I always have to resist the urge myself to get very emotional about it. And so I want to treat this one just like any other case, right? We want to treat all of these cases with at least some sense of objectivity to give both sides the ability to make their case, make their arguments, and to see where do the facts lay out? Where do the facts lay out along with the law, right? Because that's what we always do and on this channel and in a lot of other channels across LawTube, the lawyers of YouTube, is we are taking the facts, applying them to the law, and then seeing where this particular case lays out. Regardless of how you feel about the tragic death of Kobe Bryant, Gianna Bryant, obviously, it's like I still don't fully believe that they've died, because it's just so sudden and it's just not something that you would ever expect or ever think would be possible, right? Because it's like they were like he was in the prime of his life, she was in still like the early days of her life, very promising future, and it's just tragic, right? So nothing that we say on this channel takes away from that sense at all, right? So what we're talking about is the specific lawsuit. Let me get a super chat real quick. Katri, thanks so much for your super chat. Says, good evening from Finland. Love your channel. Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate that you are watching. And I do appreciate all you guys also that are that are joining here in the chat too. So Dragon's Treasure. Let the emotion flow, burn with rage. No, 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 no. Carol B says nobody should be taking photos other than who was investigating the scene. And that's one of the things that we're going to get into. That's one of the arguments that the other side has. I'm not saying that I agree with either side right now. As we go through this particular case, I'll talk about the different arguments that I think are maybe better, maybe worse. But one of their big arguments is that they say the photos that were taken by investigators, and they were only mostly only shared with the people that were working in that particular case, whether they were working like a little bit further in the concentric circle. But there were some that were shared outside of the departments in which people were employed. For example, there's one that allegedly had, and I say allegedly not because I'm skeptical of the claims, but because that's, until they're proven at trial, every fact is alleged, right? But one person had allegedly shown it to a friend at a bar that was a bartender, and then tried to show it to his niece. And then there's another one that had shown to other fire department personnel at an awards show, like in a situation where like you shouldn't be sharing these things. So there is definitely some inappropriate behavior from reading some of the filings that I've seen. It seems that the defendants, at the very least, recognize that the behavior was inappropriate, and so they're like, "Yeah, they've been reprimanded, but we still think that she doesn't win on this negligence claim. She doesn't win on this privacy claim, or this constitutional claim." Anyway, so before we get into some more of those sort of details there, I do also want to say I'm investigating into more cases with pending hearings, pending trials, that kind of thing. So let me know in the chat and in the comments below if you have a particular case that you are very, very interested in seeing or hearing about. I know I've gotten commentary about the Murdaugh trial. Some people are very interested in that. There's also the Danny Masterson trial that is set for November. There's obviously the Marilyn Manson cases. I'm covering that, and then I'm going to have more content coming out about that. But there's Brad Pitt versus Jolie, which seems to be a little bit on ice until like October, based on the filings that I've seen. There's Trevor Bauer. He has a defamation case. The Dodger player who was accused of DV, domestic violence. So he has a defamation claim against The Athletic and one of their journalists. So there's a lot of cases that are coming up. Masterson, I'm seeing a lot in the chat about Danny Masterson. Kristen Smart in California. So yeah, that's one that I haven't quite looked into yet, but I do understand that it's a little spicy. So anyway, so yeah, but okay, before we get into all of that, I do have something to share with you guys, because I've been meaning to share this for a while. And the reason why I haven't is because I keep forgetting. Like, I literally started this live stream with my hand on it because I keep forgetting. So you guys know it's been a while, but we did cross the 100,000 subscriber threshold during the Dept Heard trial. And so it takes a while for this to come in. But I also had it sent to California because I knew that I was going to be picking it up there. And I didn't quite trust it to come internationally. So I do have with me the silver play button. And I just wanted to share it because it's really not about me. I mean, I wouldn't have 100,000 subscribers or 246,000 subscribers without the folks like you that are here. So really quick, I just wanted to share this. Funny enough, it was already unboxed because my mom, it came in the mail and she was like, "Oh, this thing came in the mail for you." And I was like, "No, you're not supposed to do that." She like sent me photos of like the letter and of the button. And so she was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. I was like, it's kind of a moment that I was hoping to share with my viewers, but I love you anyway. And thanks for being excited for me, Mom. So anyway, I'll read the letter real quick. So this is from Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube. She says, do you remember your first subscriber, your 100th or your 1,000th subscriber? Chances are you do. And we know that you'll definitely remember your 100,000th subscriber. Your fans may have found you while searching YouTube, learned about you through a friend, or maybe you showed up as a recommended video. No matter how they came to your channel, fans stayed and their numbers increased because of your unique voice and the excitement of being part of the growing community that you established. We are thrilled to see the development of your community and are proud to honor your impressive milestone of reaching 100,000 subscribers with the Silver Creator Award. Congratulations. We know that you have many more stories to share with your community, and we know that your fans can't wait for you to engage and amaze them even more with your commitment and creativity. So keep creating, keep building. We can't wait to see what you'll do next, and we're here to support you along the way. And who knows, when you reach your 1,000,000th subscriber, we may just write to you and ask, do you remember your 100,000th subscriber? Sincerely, Susan Wojcicki. So lovely. Fantastic. That's great. I have a feeling probably everyone that gets a silver play button probably gets that exact letter, but that's fine. That doesn't matter. It's still a very sweet letter. So anyway, that's it. That's it right there. I'm super excited. This is going to go on the shelf behind me so you guys can see it. And yeah. So I know it's, like I said, it's kind of funny to do that when we've long surpassed it, but I still wanted to share it. Anyway, so thanks, guys. Thank you so much for all of your support, for watching, liking, sharing, subscribing, all that great stuff. I really do appreciate it, and I wanted to share that with you guys. So, okay, with that, let's get into this particular case. So, as you probably know, in January 2020, Kobe Bryant was in a helicopter with his daughter, Gianna Bryant. They were flying from Orange County to Los Angeles for a basketball tournament, along with some other girls from her team, as well as other parents and coaches, I believe. And so basically they were all just taking this helicopter up. They wanted to participate in the tournament and then probably fly back down the same day, is my guess. Unfortunately, they ran into some fog in the hills and they crashed. Now, there were, like I said before, there were multiple lawsuits that kind of sprung out of this tragedy. One was a lawsuit between Vanessa Bryant and her mother. That was a probate action, is my understanding, because I think the mom decided to file a claim against the estate saying, I had all of these hours of unpaid nannying and housekeeping services or something like that. And Kobe always promised me that he was going to take care of me or whatever. This is not uncommon when you have someone of wealth that passes away. You have some family members that come forward or some friends or something saying, so-and-so promised to take care of me. And so, I want my share or whatever. So this was one, and Vanessa responded saying, there was a will, to answer the chat. There was a will, there was a trust. But you can still have some people try to come in and make claims against the estate. Sometimes that's not, you can't exactly, prevent that from like 100%, but, so having a will, having a trust definitely helps to combat those kinds of claims, because you can say in your trust document, in your will, etc., you can say no other claims. Like if anybody else like claims that I promised to provide for them, no, I didn't. So that kind of stuff can be written into that. That can help for sure. But anyway, Vanessa responded saying, no, you didn't provide any of these services. I've always been a stay-at-home mom, et cetera, et cetera. You've always been a thorn in my side. That's my understanding. And I think that one's settled. Another one that cropped up out of this tragedy was a case filed by Vanessa Bryant, as well as other survivors, other family members of the people that died in the crash, because I don't think anybody walked away from it. But the family members of these individuals filed a case for negligence against the helicopter company, and ultimately that one settled with all of the plaintiffs settled with that company. Normal. Now, this particular case is just between Vanessa Bryant and the LA County Sheriff's Department, the LA County Fire Department, and a number of individuals that work for them. One of them used to be Sheriff Villanueva, but he was dismissed relatively early on. And since then, everyone else has continued on in the lawsuit. And what this particular lawsuit is about is it's not about what caused the helicopter accident. It's not about what caused the what caused the malfunction, whatever. It wasn't about that. It was about the particular photos that were taken and then shown to some other individuals that Vanessa Bryant claims was improper, not just improper, but actually a violation of her rights. So that is the basic gist here. Now, some people might look at this particular case as a money grab. Some people might look at this as seeking justice. I, for one, do not see this as a money grab. And I think that anyone that calls it that, I think, have a little bit of sensitivity about what's going on here, because there could always be a possibility that somebody is filing a lawsuit because they have a weird, they have grief that's showing up in a weird way. I say that because I have practiced trust litigation, probate litigation, and I've worked with clients who were grieving, and they were working through their grief in all kinds of weird ways. And sometimes filing a lawsuit is one of those ways that somebody will almost like not resolve their grief, not resolve their saying goodbye to someone by continuing to fight in a way, if that makes sense. I don't think that's happening here either, though. I think that from what I have seen of public statements that she's made, I think that she truly is filing this lawsuit because she wants to send a message, I guess, so to speak, and to enact some changes in the ways that they are doing things. So to answer the chat, was it pictures of the bodies that got shared? Yes, that was what it was. It was they were gruesome images, and we'll get into some more of the details now. And when I say details, I'm not going to be. I don't think that the photos even actually exist anymore, so they can't be shared. But I'm not going to go into any sort of detail about what those images showed, other than that they were images of the deceased, because that's what the case is all about. So it's impossible to describe what this lawsuit is about without saying that. So, but that's the only kind of amount of detail that I will ever get into in this particular case about that, because I know that there's a lot of sensitivities about that. So the reason why, Kai and Hai has a question. Why was the sheriff dismissed from the suit early on? The reason was because they had alleged negligence against Sheriff Villanueva, and the court determined that the element, so there's certain elements, we'll go through them, but the element of duty was not met in the complaint, basically saying that they could not prove that Sheriff Villanueva had a particular duty to Vanessa Bryant or to the family of Kobe Bryant to prevent certain things from happening, i.e. the sharing of the images. So that's him as an individual. Now, the entire department, however, is still a party here. The entity that is the sheriff's department and the fire department, and these different individuals that actually shared it, they are all still parties. So, okay. Now, let's get into the actual complaint, shall we? Okay. So, as you can see, she has alleged 5 different causes of action. You can basically boil them down into 3 because some of them are repeats here. One of them is the violation of the 14th Amendment. Basically, what she's saying is that they have violated her right to privacy, particularly the right to control the way in which images of her deceased loved ones are shared or disseminated. The second one is negligence. So, like I said, Sheriff Villanueva was dismissed from that. So he's not a particular party. He had been named as a defendant with a negligence count. So in order for that, basically, Vanessa has to show that the defendant had a duty, that they breached a duty, that she's got to show causation, and then she's got to show damages. So basically that she can link her particular damages to that particular breach of a duty. So you can figure here that in this particular case, she's alleging that they had a duty not to share images in a particular way, in a particular fashion, to particular people, and that they breached that duty by actually going ahead and sharing them. And as far as the departments are concerned, that they had that they breached a duty in not having certain policies enacted to prevent that, basically, and that as a result, she has suffered some emotional harm. There are some points here that the opposing side is really pressing on. One of them is the fact that the images that were shared were not shared with the press. They were not shared with the internet. They were shared like from an individual, like showing their phone, as opposed to like disseminating them outside of the department, at least. And Kit Kat, to answer your question, does anyone know if there was an internal investigation? Yes, there was. So there was one afterwards, and we'll I can't remember if it's actually in the complaint, but it is in their motion for summary judgment. But yeah. So, and then finally, invasion of privacy. So, for basically the same. Okay, let's get into the facts here as they alleged. Okay, general allegations. The facts are a little bit long in this particular case, but I think it's because there have been multiple instances where certain things happened over time. It wasn't just like the crash and the photo and it's shared. There's been a bit of a timeline here. Okay, let's go through it. General allegations. Sheriff's and fire department personnel took shared unnecessary photos of the victims' remains. On the morning of January 26, 2020, a helicopter carrying Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, crashed into the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains near Calabasas, California. The pilot and all passengers died on impact. The hours after the crash were filled with confusion. Mrs. Bryant learned of the crash from an employee of Kobe Inc., but was told there were survivors. She then began receiving Instagram messages expressing sympathy for her loss. Based on a leak by law enforcement, TMZ had reported that Kobe had died in a helicopter accident. Having heard nothing from law enforcement herself, Mrs. Bryant was confused and distraught. Ultimately, other news outlets confirmed that Kobe and Gianna had perished in the accident. So you can see, like, already from the first paragraph, that you've got someone who is famous, has a famous husband, has a famous daughter, and she's finding out from the headlines about this death. I can already see this being in their opening statement, because like that's a tough way to find out that your loved one died, right? Like this is why when a soldier dies in combat, as an example, or a police officer dies, or anyone dies, really, before that the name or the image is released to the public, they contact the family. So this is already like, you can already feel like things for her started off on the very bad foot, right? That is not necessarily negligence. It's not necessarily illegal per se, but you can already see that the emotions are there of like grief plus how she finds out about it. Ugh, horrible. So, moving on. Paparazzi, members of the public, and a significant number of unauthorized drones flocked to the crash site. The sheriff's department closed multiple roads and freeway off-ramps leading to the site to discourage onlookers, and the Federal Aviation Administration imposed a 5-mile no-fly zone overhead at Miss Bryant's request. An emergency ordinance prohibited unauthorized access to the site, and Sheriff Villanueva announced that trespassers would be arrested and charged with a misdemeanor. Meanwhile, Mrs. Bryant and other family members of the victims gathered at the nearby sheriff's station in Lost Hills. Mrs. Bryant spoke with Sheriff Alex Villanueva and expressed concern that the crash site was unprotected from photographers. Sheriff Villanueva assured her that his deputies were securing the scene. This assurance was hollow. Notwithstanding Sheriff Villanueva's later acknowledgement that Sheriff's Department personnel had no place to be taking photographs of anything, deputies who responded to the crash scene used personal cell phones to take and share gratuitous photos of the dead children, parents, and coaches. According to the Sheriff's Department's subsequent investigatory report, one deputy in particular took between 25 and 100 photos of the crash scene on his personal cell phone, many of which had no conceivable investigatory purpose and were focused directly on the victims' remains. Yeah. Photos of the remains quickly spread within the sheriff's department as deputies transmitted them to one another via text message and airdrop. Within 48 hours, at least 10 members of the sheriff's department obtained and possessed photos of the victims' remains on their personal cell phones, despite having no legitimate governmental use for the photos. Making matters worse, sheriff's department personnel showed off the photos of victims' remains to colleagues in settings that had nothing to do with investigating the crash. An investigation that was being handled by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, not the sheriff's department, and the photos became the subject of gossip within the department. Members of the fire department engaged in similar misconduct. While working the crash site on January 26, 2020, several members of the fire department abused their access to take graphic photos of the victims' remains without any legitimate governmental purpose. One such instance occurred at approximately 2:00 p.m. on January 26, 2020, long after the downed helicopter had been identified, when a sheriff's deputy observed a firefighter taking multiple pictures of the accident scene. As the deputy later explained to sheriff's department investigators, the firefighter, quote, wasn't one of the first responders, unquote, but rather, quote, showed up after the fact and then started taking pictures as well, unquote. Oh boy. In addition, according to a complaint filed in Los Angeles County Superior Court in November 2020 by Tony Imbrunda, a public information officer in the fire department who responded to the crash scene on the day of the accident but was not involved in investigating the accident, multiple firefighters electronically transmitted photos of the crash scene to him. Based on the foregoing, plaintiff believes and thereon alleges that in the hours and days that followed the crash, several members of the fire department electronically shared and or displayed the graphic images of her loved one's remains to colleagues without any legitimate governmental purpose. Deputy Rafael Mejia. So this is one of the individuals here. Rafael Mejia, a deputy with the sheriff's department, responded to the general proximity of the accident scene on January 26, 2020, and stationed himself at the department's makeshift command post at the Las Virgenes Water District. While there, Mejia obtained multiple photographs of the Bryant's remains and stored them on his personal cell phone. Shortly after obtaining photos of the Bryant's remains, Mejia shared them with at least 2 individuals without any legitimate governmental purpose. At some point on January 26, 2020, after Mejia and others had learned that the victims of the helicopter accident included Kobe and Gianna Bryant, Mejia walked 100 feet from his position at the makeshift command post to chat with a female deputy who was controlling traffic in and out of the Las Virgenes Water District. Mejia told the deputy that he had photos of the accident scene and, for no reason other than morbid gossip, proceeded to send the photos of the Bryant's remains to her personal cell phone. The deputy had no role in investigating the accident or identifying those who perished, and later acknowledged in an interview with department investigators that she had no legitimate governmental purpose for the photos. Similarly, Mejia admitted to investigators that the deputy did not need the photos for any reason and that it was inappropriate to send them to her. In explaining his actions to investigators, Mejia could only say that curiosity got the best of them and that such curiosity was in their nature as deputies. At a separate point on January 26, 2020, and again with the knowledge that Kobe and Gianna Bryant were among those who perished in the crash, Mejia electronically transmitted photos of the Bryants' remains to another deputy, Joey Cruz. Cruz had responded to the general proximity of the accident scene along with Mejia, but he had no role in investigating the accident or identifying those who perished. Mejia sent photos of the Bryants' remains to Cruz's personal cell phone without any legitimate governmental purpose. Following the above actions, Mejia learned that a complaint had been. Sorry, I scrolled and then I got distracted. Following the above actions, Mejia learned that a complaint had been filed with the sheriff's department regarding improper sharing of photos of the crash victims' remains. Mejia then negligently and or willfully destroyed evidence of his wrongdoing by deleting photos of the victims' remains and other evidence from his personal cell phone. At the time, Mejia had an obligation to preserve this evidence of his wrongdoing, including any associated metadata, and as a trained law enforcement officer, knew or should have known that the evidence may be relevant to future litigation or investigations. By committing this spoliation, Mejia severely undermined the ability to verify any of his claims regarding his handling and dissemination of the photos. Deputy Joey Cruz. Joey Cruz, a trainee deputy with the sheriff's department, responded to the general proximity of the accident scene on January 26, 2020. While there, Cruz was posted at the base of the hillside where he monitored entry to a trailhead that led to the downed helicopter. At no point on the day of the accident or at any time thereafter did Cruz have a role in investigating the accident or identifying those who perished. Nonetheless, at some point during his shift, Cruz obtained multiple photographs of the Bryant's remains on his personal cell phone. After obtaining photos of the Bryant's remains, Cruz shared them with multiple individuals without any legitimate governmental purpose, including several members of the public. While at the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station on the evening of January 26, 2020, long after Cruz and others had learned that the victims of the helicopter accident included Kobe and Gianna Bryant, Cruz told another deputy, Michael Russell, that he had photos of the accident scene. Russell asked to see the photos, and Cruz texted photos of the Bryant's remains to Russell's personal cell phone. There was no legitimate governmental purpose for Cruz to transmit the photos to Russell because, like Cruz, Russell had no role in investigating the accident or identifying those who perished. On January 28th, 2020, while at his mother's house in West Covina, California, Cruz showed photos of the Bryant's remains to his niece. Before displaying the photos, Cruz made a crude remark about the state of the victim's remains. So this is from the complaint. My understanding is that there was a deposition either of Cruz or of the niece. And what it turns out is that he tried to show it to the niece and she refused to look at them. So, but this is, like I said, this is the complaint. So some things will be factually shown to be not the case, but it's still, I mean, he apparently tried to show it to his niece. So make of that what you will, right? While at the Baja California Bar and Grill in Norwalk, California on January 28th, 2020, Cruz boasted that he had worked at the scene of the accident where Kobe Bryant had died. Cruz then showed photos of the Bryant's remains to a fellow bar patron and the restaurant's bartender, and he is seen on the bar security camera zooming in and out of the images while displaying them to the bartender. Ooh, they have security camera footage of it. That's pretty damning. One of the photos showed the body of a girl, and Cruz remarked that another showed the remains of Kobe Bryant. Shortly after seeing the photos, the bartender loudly boasted to restaurant employees and patrons that he had just seen a photo of Kobe Bryant's body and described the image in graphic detail. God. Ah. Following the above actions, Cruz learned that a complaint had been filed with the sheriff's department regarding improper sharing of photos of the crash victims' remains. Cruz then negligently and or willfully destroyed evidence of his wrongdoing by deleting photos of the victims' remains from his personal cell phone and deleting the text messages he had sent Russell that contained photos of the victims' remains. At the time, Cruz had an obligation to preserve this evidence of his wrongdoing, including any associated metadata, and as a trained law enforcement officer, knew or should have known that the evidence may be relevant for future litigation or investigations. By committing this spoliation, Cruz severely undermined the ability to verify any of his claims regarding his handling and dissemination of the photos. There's another one. Okay. Deputy Michael Russell. Deputy Michael Russell responded to the general proximity of the accident scene on January 26, 2020, and was staffed to a checkpoint at the base of a hillside that led to the downed helicopter. Throughout the day, Russell heard rumors that photos of the accident scene were circulating among other deputies, and he was curious to see them himself. While at the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station that evening, Russell asked crews to send him the photos, and crews sent him photos of the Bryant's remains. Russell saved the photos to an album on his personal cell phone so that he did not have to keep going into the text message to view them. At no point did Russell play any role in investigating the accident or identifying those who perished. In an interview with department investigators, Russell admitted that there was no investigative purpose for him to obtain the photos and that it was inappropriate for him to take possession of them. Nonetheless, on or around January 28th, 2020, Russell shared the photos with a personal friend with whom Russell plays video games nightly. Although the friend is a sheriff's deputy, he was assigned to the Santa Clarita station, not the Lost Hills station, and had no involvement whatsoever in the response to the helicopter accident. In a text exchange initiated by Russell, Russell told a friend that he had pictures of the accident scene. Russell then texted photos of the Bryant's remains to his friend's personal cell phone, noting that one of the victims depicted was Kobe Bryant. In a later interview with department investigators, Russell's friend indicated that one of the photos showed the remains of a child and that the remains appeared to be the primary focus of the photo. Following the above actions, Russell negligently and or willfully destroyed the evidence of his wrongdoing. So there's basically the same thing that they alleged. He deleted the photos and then made it much harder to litigate the case because of that. Deputy Raul Versailles. Raul Versailles, a deputy with the sheriff's department, responded to the general proximity of the accident scene on January 26, 2020, and stationed himself at the makeshift command post established at the Los Virgenes Water District. While there, Versailles obtained multiple photographs of the Bryant's remains, stored them on his personal cell phone, and shared them with several other department personnel, including Mejia. On the evening of January 26, 2020, long after Versailles learned that the victims of the helicopter accident included Kobe and Gianna Bryant, Versailles sent photos of the Bryant's remains to a detective for the department without any legitimate governmental purpose. The detective had responded to the general proximity of the accident scene earlier in the day, but had no role in investigating the accident or identifying those who perished. As the detective admitted to department investigators, he did not use the photos for any official purpose, and there was no reason for him to receive them. As an indication of how casually the photos were shared within the department, the detective could not even identify the name of the deputy who sent him the photos during an interview with department investigators. Following his shift on January 26, 2020, the detective asked his wife, who is not a law enforcement officer and had no reason to view the photos, whether she wanted to see the photos of the victim's remains. Okay, and then he deleted them. The defendants attempt a cover-up and destroy evidence. Minutes after crews left the Baja California Bar and Grill on the evening of January 20th, 2020, the bartender approached a table of 4 patrons and excitedly stated that a sheriff's deputy had just shown him graphic photos of Kobe Bryant's remains. The bartender described specific characteristics of Mr. Bryant's remains, explained how the remains could be linked to Mr. Bryant, and indicated he found the situation humorous. The bartender was poised to divulge additional details, but the patrons expressed that they did not want to hear anything further. Yeah. Fun times. Thanks so much for your chat. Thanks for being a member. For some reason, the member chats don't show up in StreamYard, so I can't pull it up onto the screen. But so I will, because I can't save it, I will read it right now. It says, "This is so wrong. I'm glad she is suing, but no matter what happens, you can't undo the damage this did to the Bryant family." Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty awful to hear that somebody found the remains of your loved one humorous. Pretty bad. And we'll get into some of the legal arguments and stuff too, but it's this is hard to read through, right? For obvious reasons, because this is just, I mean, it's bad enough that you lose one loved one? How about two loved ones? And in such a public way. And oh, by the way, the public finds out before you. And then, oh, by the way, then this happens. This is hard. This is it's really, really difficult. I can't imagine what Vanessa Bryant has been carrying for the last 2 years, right? um, so anyway. Midnight Yell, to answer your question, what is member chat? So in the chat, you can see there was a chat that was highlighted in green. That's because that was put up by a member. So it wasn't a super chat, it was a chat by a member. So okay. Let's continue through this very heavy, heavy complaint. In a later interview with department investigators, one of the patrons explained that he found the situation very, very disturbing, such that it bothered him that entire night, even on his drive home. The patron believed it was very inappropriate for that deputy to be there at that environment, showing those pictures to other individuals, and the situation did not sit well with him at all. Upon arriving home, the patron emailed a complaint to the sheriff's department while sitting in his car in his driveway. It said, there was a deputy at Baja California Bar and Grill in Norwalk who was at the Kobe Bryant crash site showing pictures of his, i.e. Kobe Bryant's body. He was working the day the helicopter went down and took pictures of the crash site and bodies. He is a young deputy, shaved head with tattoos on his arm. From what I know, he's been on the field for 4 months. Shout out to that guy, right? Shout out to the guy that was like, this is wrong. And I'm gonna say something about it. I'm gonna make a complaint about it. Also, this is an interesting point to point out that apparently making a complaint like this can actually be heard, right? Because that could have just been buried and nobody ever hears about any of it, right? But obviously, that was read. It was taken into consideration, and now there's a conversation about it. So it just goes to show that, like, if you do have like a serious problem with something like that, make a complaint. Something might actually happen. Under normal protocol, this complaint would have triggered a formal inquiry and or an internal affairs investigation. But Sheriff Villanueva did not follow protocol. He did not conduct a standard investigation or collect, inspect, or search cell phones to determine how many photos existed, whether and how they had been transmitted, or whether they were stored on the cloud. He did not inform the LA County Office of the Inspector General. Most importantly, he did not alert the victims' families of the misconduct or the existence of the photos. So everything that I just said, though, about like, oh, okay, yeah, this kind of stuff can get heard. I mean, this does cast some shadow on that because even still, things allegedly were not done properly, according to the complaint. Instead, sometime in late January 2020, Sheriff Villanueva summoned his deputies to the Lost Hill station and told them that if they came clean and deleted the photos, they would not face any discipline. The deputies responded by claiming that they had deleted the photos, and to the extent they had transmitted the photos to others, those persons had also deleted them. Sheriff Villanueva abided by his offer and did not discipline the deputies for violating the constitutional right of the victims' families. For nearly a month, until their hands were forced by public reports about the photos, Sheriff Villanueva and the department took no further action to investigate or contain the spread of the photos. Oh, okay. So it was only until they were forced, apparently, according to the complaint. Kestrel 42 says cops do this with normal, non-famous victims all the time. This is a point that is going to come up because there's some conversation about this being a relatively common thing. And we will be talking about that too, about morbid curiosities and celebrity curiosity. And when you merge the two, you can have some very bad consequences, right? Very bad results. But let's continue through this complaint first. The above actions were taken to avoid the consequences of misconduct by department personnel, or at a minimum in reckless disregard of the risk that destruction of evidence would render a complete investigation impossible. At that time, the department leadership ordered deletion of the photos without conducting any meaningful investigation. The department and the county knew or should have known that the actions of department personnel, including Cruz's conduct at the bar in Norwalk, California, constituted tortious conduct under California law and a violation of the constitutional rights of the victims' families under the United States Constitution. Hence, the department and the county had an obligation to preserve evidence of the department's wrongdoing, including any associated metadata. And as trained law enforcement officers, department leadership knew or should have known that the evidence may be relevant to future litigation and investigations. The misconduct is exposed. On February 27th and 28th, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that several sheriff's deputies had taken and shared photos of the victims' remains and that the sheriff's department had been aware of the misconduct for nearly a month. Soon thereafter, the Times also exposed the department's attempted cover-up, reporting that it tried to keep a lid on the episode instead of following normal investigative protocols. Around the same time, it was reported that fire department personnel were sharing graphic photos of the victims' remains and that the department responded by telling its members to destroy the photos. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times on February 26, 2020, Captain Jorge Valdez stated that he was unaware of any complaint regarding crash scene photos and that there was no order given to delete any photographs. Both statements were false. Valdez was personally involved in responding to the citizen complaint. Having spoken to the complainant himself. And Sheriff Villanueva has since made numerous admissions about deputies taking photos of the victims' remains in his orders to destroy them without any meaningful investigation. Okay. So then we have people, we've got Captain Jorge Valdez apparently making some statements that were false on top of it, trying to allegedly lie about these things existing, a lie about the complaint, et cetera, et cetera. Uncivil Law. Hey, he's also a member. Let's read your member comment too. It says people who deal in death, doctors, EMT, police can have uncomfortably dark senses of humor. Unpopular take. I feel some sympathy for the police here. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that along with some of my own experiences, because it's interesting. Yeah. The way in which I am very interested in the psychology of the way in which someone has to deal with encountering these kinds of scenes, right? Because there are some people that this is what they do. This is at least part of what they do. And so the way in which somebody manages dealing with death, dealing with this kind of death, like one that's like particularly gruesome, is can be a little bit wonky. And so having empathy on that regard is not inappropriate either. So let's continue on, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Through statements made by Sheriff Alex Villanueva in his official capacity, the Sheriff's Department and the county have admitted the facts showing their tortious conduct and violation of Mrs. Bryant's constitutional rights. In media appearances in late February and early March 2020, Sheriff Villanueva admitted that at least 8 deputies took and or shared photos of the victims' remains and acknowledged that the conduct was disgusting, wildly inappropriate, inexcusable, and unconscionable. Sheriff Villanueva further admitted that the improper photos harmed people who have suffered a tragedy already by creating the possibility of a public display of their loved ones' remains. Sheriff Villanueva has also admitted that the photos of the victims' bodies were not taken for any law enforcement purpose. In response to questions from reports on March 2nd, 2020, Sheriff Villanueva admitted, in this type of scene, which is an accident, there's only 2 groups of people that should be taking photos. That is the NTSB and the coroner's office. No one else has any reason to take any photos. Anybody outside of the NTSB and coroner's office would be unauthorized. It would be illicit photos. In another interview the same day, Sheriff Villanueva admitted the deputies had no place to be taking any photographs of anything. Only in this case, it would have been NTSB investigators, coroner's investigators, and that's about it. Nobody else. The sheriff's department has also admitted to destroying evidence of the unlawful photos. In an interview with NBC4 Los Angeles on March 2nd, 2020, Sheriff Villanuevas stated that he learned within days of the crash that a trainee deputy had allegedly showed off crash scene photos at a bar, and in response, the department ordered the trainee and 7 other deputies to delete the photos. Villanueva stated that his number one priority was to make sure those photos no longer existed. According to Villanueva, the department identified what we thought were the 8 individuals who took the images, and they deleted all the pictures they had, and they acknowledged that if they transmitted them, that they were deleted. The sheriffs and fire departments knew or should have known that first responders taking photos of human remains is a long-standing problem. So here's where we get into that previous chat comment about this being a common thing. On and before the date of the helicopter crash, the sheriff's department knew that unnecessarily taking, possessing, and sharing photos of victims' remains had been a long-running problem for law enforcement. Addressing reporters on March 2nd, 2020, Sheriff Villanueva stated, "Unfortunately, ever since they invented the Polaroid camera, this has been a problem in law enforcement across the nation, probably across the world, because it just makes it so much easier." And then there's cops. They keep death books, for example, where they have photos from crime scenes throughout their careers. Yeah. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times on February 26, 2020, Sheriff Villanueva exhibited similar awareness of the problem. Every police department struggles with the same thing, where people take photos and they're not evidence. So that's a practice we have to make sure that everyone walks away and there is no evidence other than the official photos of evidence that are taken for criminal purposes. So, and to be fair, it sounds like what he's saying here is that this is a problem, that this is basically nationwide. Police departments have an issue with police officers or other personnel taking photos of crime scenes for their own morbid curiosities, and keeping them for themselves, keeping death books, so to speak. Problem for the LA Sheriff's Department is these are public statements that were made. So there's really no getting around it. In addition, the sheriffs and fire departments knew prior to the helicopter crash that government employees abusing access to celebrity related information has long been a problem in Los Angeles. Examples include a sheriff's deputy unlawfully leaking the arrest report of a prominent actor, and the Los Angeles Police Department improperly disclosing photos of a famous recording artist depicting injuries from a domestic assault. With respect to the helicopter crash, Sheriff Villanueva has acknowledged that the involvement of a celebrity like Kobe Bryant, a singular figure in Southern California culture and a hero to millions around the world, creates much more interest among deputies. Yeah. Yeah. Notwithstanding the above knowledge and his assurances to Mrs. Bryant, Sheriff Villanueva had said nothing in his briefings with first responders at the accident scene regarding photography or respecting privacy. Yeah, and this is I wanted to wait until wanted to at least try to wait until the end of like the factual section here, but this is something that is, we kind of have to check our rage sometimes on these things, right? Because everyone has a certain level of morbid curiosity, right? I'm not saying that everyone is doing this, but there's a reason why whenever there's a car accident, especially a big car accident on the side of the road, right? The traffic that results is not so much because of how much of the road is being blocked by the accident. It is more because people are slowing down to rubberneck, right? They're slowing down to take a look what happened. That's because people are curious to a certain extent, right? So everyone has this capacity to have a morbid curiosity. I will say that. At the same time, taking photos of deceased loved ones, that is going definitely a few steps beyond looking to see what happened at a car accident, right? This is a few steps beyond. First off, going to see the images, saving the images, sharing the images, showing them off for humor. This is bad, right? So, there's a lot. There's a lot that's going on here. And I will say, like I said before, when Kurt mentioned earlier in the chat that sometimes you have to have a dark sense of humor in order to deal with a lot of this kind of stuff. Police officers, coroners especially. I've taken a tour of the LA County Coroner's office or office facility, I guess, and they're a quirky bunch. You kind of have to be in order to deal with death day in and day out, right? And that experience touring that whole facility, going into the big Costco style refrigerator room where they keep the remains of people and seeing that and going through and seeing like an autopsy actually happening, was that experience was the day that I realized just how much we ritualize death so that we can deal with it. Because growing up in a small ethnic community, I grew up going to a lot of funerals. And so I figured going into this tour, like, hey, I can handle it. I've gone to so many funerals since forever. Like I'm fine going to funerals. It's fine. But you strip away all of those traditions and rituals and everything else, and then you find out just how weird and spooky and kind of terrifying it can be, especially when you've got remains of all ages, from infants to the seniors. It's just, yeah. So, of course, now there's that morbid curiosity that I was talking about, and then there's being a professional, right? Because you still have to, as a professional, remember that you are dealing with a human being that had a life, that had a family. Now, when you are the coroner, it is your job to go into this human being and find out what happened. So to a certain extent, you have to strip away all of those traditions, all of those rituals. You have to look at this, what used to be a human being, and look at it very scientifically, because otherwise you would not be able to do your job. Fact. You would not be able to. Other individuals, though, that maybe don't need to look at it or maybe don't need to like live in that environment on a daily basis, it's a bit different. There should be standards. There should be certain procedures in place. Now, there's that morbid curiosity. And like I said before, there is that professional standard that should be required. And then there's also living in LA. There's also knowing that there's always a possibility that one of these individuals could be a celebrity. This is not some small town somewhere, right? This is somewhere that you throw a stone, you could run into a celebrity. I'm not saying everybody in LA has run into a celebrity, but they're abundant, right? It's Hollywood. This is where you've got actors, you've got singers, you've got, dancers, you've got obviously athletes. There's a lot. There's a lot. So you have to know that there is a certain curiosity around celebrity as well. And when you merge those two together, you're going to have a higher likelihood, even still, of somebody having morbid curiosity, right? This is the reason why, going back to my experience at the LA County Coroner's office, or facility or whatever, why they have, it's this exact reason why they have a specific cage for the remains of celebrities and public figures. So I know the exact location where they go immediately after they die, if they die in a way that is very sudden or unexpected. Because they put them into a particular cage because they've literally had problems with paparazzi before, for that exact reason, because a celebrity who has passed is particularly interesting to a lot of people. So I have a lot of thoughts on it. M says EDB had trauma as DA, but processed with colleagues in therapy, not inappropriate breach of privacy, duty, and ethics, and to hand trauma by sharing with family and strangers. I agree. I completely agree. What I'm saying about that is I want to be clear that what I'm saying about the psychology of these people that are dealing with these different kinds of jobs is not to give them an excuse from it, from what they did. Not at all. Just to sort of, I guess, sort of figure out the psychology behind it. But I completely agree that there are ways to process it, ways to deal with it, and that shouldn't be one of them. Like disrespecting the human being that was this person and their family members is probably not the way to do it. Okay. Let us Busha Busha Gallows Humor is called. That's correct. Okay. Continuing through this complaint. The sheriffs and fire departments had no policies to prevent violations of the constitutional right to control the death images of deceased loved ones. Since at least 2012, it has been clear in the Ninth Circuit that individuals have a substantive due process right under the United States Constitution to control the death images and physical remains of deceased family members. Nonetheless, and despite the department's awareness that improper death images are a problem in law enforcement across the nation, neither the sheriff's department nor the fire department had a policy at the time of the accident regarding taking or sharing of photos of human remains. Following the Los Angeles Times reports, the sheriff department issued a statement that the allegations regarding the accident scene photos are currently under investigation, as are the effectiveness of existing policies and procedures. Days later, in a letter to the LA County Inspector General, Sheriff Villanueva admitted, "It is evident our photograph policy is deficient, and this incident has identified a need for me to direct the creation of a new policy." That's a hell of an admission. I wonder who was counseling him before he was making these statements. Because that's like I said, that's hell of an admission. Similarly, in an interview with NBC4 in March 2020, Sheriff Villanueva stated that the department was creating new policies that are very specific with teeth in them to up to and including a penalty of discharge for violation of these policies. In the following months, the Sheriff's Department added an entirely new section to its Manual of Policies and Procedures titled Photographs and Recordings at Scenes Where Human Remains Are Present. The new policy dictates that in order to preserve the dignity and privacy of the deceased and their families, scenes where human remains are present shall only be photographed and recorded by Scientific Services Bureau or the Department of Medical Examiner personnel. The new policy further provides any photograph, recording, or record produced by a department member shall be considered the sole property of the department, and any unauthorized release or sharing is strictly prohibited. Sounds like a good policy. In interviews with Sheriff's Department investigators regarding the improper photos, personnel throughout the chain of command confirmed that the Sheriff's Department had no clear policy and had provided no training or instruction regarding photographs of human remains prior to the accident. Numerous deputies who responded to the accident scene on January 26, 2020, including Mejia, Russell, Versailles, and others, told department investigators there was no instruction or briefing on the day of the accident regarding photography of the crash site or human remains. Although many of the Sheriff's Department personnel who obtained photos of the victims' remains were in the midst of training to become sheriff's deputies, had recently completed such training, or were themselves training other training officers, none demonstrated any awareness of a department policy regarding the propriety of taking, possessing, or sharing photos of human remains, nor did they report having received any training on the subject prior to the Los Angeles Times reports in February 2020. A captain for the sheriff's department who was the senior most supervisor at the makeshift command post on the day of the accident demonstrated no awareness of the sheriff's department's policy regarding use of personal cell phones to capture work-related environments, telling investigators that it was absolutely inappropriate for department personnel to use personal cell phones to photograph accident scenes. The captain further implied that using personal cell phones to take photos of human remains would be appropriate to memorialize a scene, so long as the cell phone photos are provided to the department's homicide department. In interviews with investigators, the captain displayed no awareness of any department policy related to taking, possessing, or sharing photos of human remains, nor did he report having received any training on the subject. Yeah. A sergeant for the sheriff's department, who was second in command at the makeshift command post on the day of the accident, told investigators that even with the benefit of hindsight, there was nothing he could do differently regarding the way he supervised the deputies on the day of the accident. The sergeant added that he thought that the accident scene was handled great by the sheriff's department and remarked that it's just one person, presumably Cruz, who screwed it up for everybody. Okay, that's one take. The sergeant demonstrated no awareness of the sheriff's department's policy regarding use of personal cell phones to capture work-related environments, telling investigators that he believed it was appropriate for deputies at the crash site to use their cell phones to take photos of the scene. At one point in an interview with department investigators, the sergeant stated, "If it happened again, I guess if there was a policy that specifically stated on how to, I don't know, I guess how to handle any type of video or pictures, and then it would be brought up, but I don't know." As of September 29th, 2020, as discussed below in paragraph 70, it is a crime in California for a first responder to take photos of deceased individuals without a valid purpose. Similarly, according to a lawsuit recently filed in Los Angeles Superior Court by a former public information officer for the fire department who responded to the crash scene, Tony and Brenda, the fire department had no policy at the time of the accident regarding photography at emergency incidents. The sheriff's department failed to train its employees on the department's policy regarding photos of work-related scenes on personal cell phones. And to Half Irish says, I don't care if they had training or not. Stop, think, how would they feel seeing their loved ones like that? Yeah, that's for the individuals that are taking and sharing these photos. The point of what I just read was to loop in the responsibility on the departments as well, because it's pointing to the policies to say, like, look, these individuals over here, these jokers over here, they shared these photos, you know, in such a gruesome way without any kind of regard as to what the families would be thinking, what the individuals would be thinking, right? And then this last part was pointing at the department saying, look, you should know better. You should know better than to not have a policy for something like this. You guys deal with death, right? You guys deal with accident scenes, crash scenes, that kind of stuff. And you deal with photos of these scenes. So why wouldn't there be a policy in place? Why wouldn't there be a policy in place for the average citizen? And also, why wouldn't there be a policy in place for celebrities? Like I could see there being specific policies for celebrities in a town like Los Angeles, city, right? I could see that being a thing because, like I said, the LA County coroner has a specific cage for remains for the celebrities for a similar kind of issue. The sheriff's department failed to train its employees on the department's policy regarding photos of work-related scenes on personal cell phones. In addition to failing to establish a specific policy regarding the treatment and photographing of human remains, the sheriff's department also did not follow or enforce its policy regarding deputies' use of personal cell phones to capture work-related environments. The policy provides members shall not use a personal cellular telephone or any other similar personal communication or recording device to record, store, document, catalog, transmit, and or forward any image, document, scene, or environment captured as a result of their employment and or while performing official department business that is not available or accessible to the general public. According to the Sheriff's Department's manual of policies and procedures, supervisors must investigate reports of violations of the policy and will be held accountable for and evaluated on their enforcement of the policy. Members of the department who violate the policy shall be subject to disciplinary action, which could include reprimand, suspension without pay, reduction in rank, and or dismissal from the department. In direct contravention of this policy, the sergeant who was second in command at the department's command post on the day of the accident told department investigators that the Lost Hill station had a policy and or custom of encouraging department personnel to photograph accident scenes using their personal cell phones so that the images could be posted on the station's social media accounts, including Twitter and Facebook. The sergeant explained that at the time he received the call to respond to the helicopter crash, he was at the scene of an automobile crash taking pictures on his personal cell phone. According to the sergeant, he had taken a class regarding social media and was told to take pictures of deputies in action. The sergeant added that the Lost Hills station is really big on tweeting stuff out, and they're really pushing the social media, showing us in action or whatever. Ugh. Okay. I mean, I understand you've got public relations, generally speaking, for any kind of a police department, fire department, what have you. But maybe making a distinction in certain situations, perhaps. Maybe giving some nuance as to when it's appropriate, when it's inappropriate. The sheriff's department and fire department refused to provide information to Mrs. Bryant. After learning of the existence of the photos, attorneys for Mrs. Bryant sent letters to the sheriff's and fire department requesting that they take immediate action to secure all photos and videos of the crash in their possession, including any photos or videos in the possession of or disseminated by sheriff's department's personnel. Mrs. Bryant further requested that the sheriff's department and fire department conduct internal affairs investigations to determine the extent of the unauthorized taking and dissemination of photos and the identities of the deputies and firefighters involved. On March 8th, 2020, following news reports regarding the number of deputies who took improper photos, attorneys for Mrs. Bryant sent a follow-up letter requesting more information about the sheriff's department's investigation of the deputies' misconduct, including the identity of all personnel who took photos of the victims' remains. The steps the department had taken to identify all personnel who had the photos on their personal devices, the steps the department had taken to determine whether and to what extent personnel who had such photos or recordings shared them with other members of the department or third parties, and the steps the department had taken to secure all photos or recordings of the victims' remains in the possession of its personnel. On March 26th and April 2nd, 2020, nearly a month after Mrs. Bryant first inquired about the misconduct, an attorney for the sheriff's department wrote to Mrs. Bryant that the department had no legal obligation to respond to her questions and would not do so. Mrs. Bryant received a nearly identical response from an attorney for the fire department in letters dated March 10th and 26th, 2020. The sheriff's department conducts a belated deficient investigation. In response to public shock and outrage following the Los Angeles Times reports, as well as scrutiny from the sheriff's department's civilian oversight board, the department announced that it would conduct an internal affairs investigation of the improper photos. In discussing his department's inexcusably belated investigation, it's a late hour for me. Okay, let me read that again. In discussing his department's inexcusably belated investigation, Sheriff Villanuevas stated on March 2nd, 2020, all photos of remains that we know of that were in the possession of the 8 individuals were deleted. And we're hoping that that is the outcome of this, that there is no photos to be circulated anywhere. 2 months later, in May 2020, Sheriff Villanuevas stated that the department was going through the final stages of its investigation of the improper photos, and once the information is developed and it's done, we're going to make the entire investigation public so everybody can read it for themselves. The department has yet to deliver on Sheriff Villanueva's promise of publicly reporting the results of the department's investigation, but Mrs. Bryant obtained the department's final investigative report via motion to compel in January 2021. Substantively, the report reveals that the sheriff's department has failed to take basic steps to ensure all copies of the improper photos are tracked down and sequestered. The department's interviews of the offending personnel were notably brief. For example, defendant Russell was interviewed for a mere 38 minutes, and another individual known to have possessed the improper photos was questioned for only 14 minutes. In the transcribed interviews, the department's investigators revealed that they were unfamiliar with fundamental concepts regarding how photos were stored and transmitted on cell phones. Ooh, that's not good. For example, during the defendant Versailles interview, the department's lead investigator stated, "I don't know how iPhones work." And when another officer who had received photos of the victim's remains stated in his interview that he didn't understand how his phone worked and had to ask my kids how to do most of this stuff, the lead investigator responded, "Right, I'm the same way. I really don't. I'm not familiar with phones like that." Like, when you're going to have someone investigate, maybe have like the person that's investigating kind of know what to look for. Yikes. Several deputies told the department's investigators that they had transmitted the improper photos to one another using iPhone's AirDrop feature, to which the lead investigator responded, "I'm not too familiar with AirDrop." And I've come to learn that AirDrop is an iPhone feature. Is that exclusive to iPhone? No apparent investigative follow-up occurred. Oh, man. That's bad. Several subjects of the investigation were themselves unsure of how their cell phones operated and whether photos of the victim's remains still remained in storage. For example, when asked whether he had checked his cloud account to determine whether the improper photos were stored there, one member of the department who had received the photos responded, "I don't know how to. I don't know how to get into the cloud." No apparent investigative follow-up occurred. Brilliant. Indeed, at no point during the investigation did department investigators forensically examine the phones of personnel known to have possessed and or shared photos of the crash victims' remains using their personal cell phones. Instead, the report's conclusions rest almost entirely on unverified, unsworn statements made by the offending personnel in interviews with department investigators. Predictably, defendants either spoliation of evidence earlier spoliation of evidence inhibited the investigation. A large portion of the interviews involved having the witnesses describe from recollection how many photos they received and what they depicted. When one interview subject expressed difficulty remembering, the department's lead investigator responded, "This is what makes it difficult. We don't have the pictures." Without photo and text messages to examine, and without having conducted a forensic examination of the deputies' cell phones, the department's purported investigatory findings amount to a regurgitation of the wrongdoers' self-serving, unsworn accounts of their own conduct. Oh. The deputy defendants exhibit consciousness of guilt by making false exculpatory statements to department investigators. All right. This continues on. Like I said, this is a bit of a long complaint because it goes on, right? The disappointment that Vanessa Bryant has in the LA County Sheriff's Department and the LA County Fire Department is long. Each of the deputy defendants made false exculpatory statements to department investigators in the wake of the citizen complaint. Their decision to hide the facts strongly suggests that their misconduct was more extensive than they have admitted. Yeah, what's that phrase? It's the cover up, not the crime. Grant McRobert says, should they not use work phones for work purposes? Yes. Yes. They should be, arguably. But apparently, according to the complaint, assuming that what the complaint says is true and correct, the LA County Sheriff's Department said that they encouraged deputies to use their personal phones at times, which to me is wild. In an interview with department investigators on March 30th, 2020, defendant Mejia claimed that only one of the crash scene photos he shared contained victims' remains. In reality, the number was at least 5, as the deputy to whom Mejia sent the photos told investigators that approximately 5 of them showed human remains. Defendant Mejia similarly made false statements in a memo he wrote to the head of the Lost Hills station on January 30th, 2020. In the memo, Mejia wrote that the purpose of me sending and receiving the crash scene photographs was to answer some questions regarding the color, numbers, and identifying features of the aircraft, as well as crash scene details. Mejia also wrote the photographs were immediately erased after the incident from my cell phone. Both of these statements were false. Really, really, really helping the image of the police department in LA, right? This is just, it's not helping. In an interview with department investigators on March 30th, 2020, Mejia admitted that there was no need to send the crash scene photos to another deputy, but he did so because curiosity got the best of us. Mejia also acknowledged that he did not delete the photos until January 30th, 2020, 4 days after the accident, when a supervisor told him to report to the Lost Hills station for questioning about the photos. In an interview with department investigators on March 30th, 2020, defendant Cruz claimed that 1, he did not show his phone to anyone other than the bartender at the Baja California Bar and Grill. 2, he never zoomed in on any of the photographs. 3, he did not recall human remains being in any of the images he showed to the bartender. And 4, he did not tell the bartender that one of the bodies depicted in the photos was Kobe Bryant's. All of these statements were false. Security footage reveals Cruz showing his phone to a fellow bar patron and using his fingers to zoom in on his phone while showing the photos to the bartender. Cops should know better, right? I get that defendant Cruz was a trainee, so he seems like he was probably relatively new on the job, but come on. You've got to be smarter than to think that you can just lie in a situation like this. It only makes things worse. And when this goes in front of a jury, it's going to look so bad. All of these guys are going to look so bad. And yeah, T, to answer your question, this is the sheriff, not LAPD. So, right. I did say the police, but what I meant was cops in general, right? Okay. And contrary to Cruz's claims, the bartender explained to department investigators that Cruz showed him 2 photos containing victims' remains and specifically noted certain details in the picture as proof that one of them reflected Kobe Bryant's remains. God. I can't believe it. I'm sorry, but it takes a certain level of stupid to think that you can lie in that kind of a situation, especially when you are in the profession of investigating those kinds of things. You know what I mean? In an interview with department investigators on March 30th, 2020, defendant Russell claimed that he had no idea whether any of the human remains in the photos belonged to Kobe Bryant. However, the deputy to whom Russell sent the photos told investigators that when sending the photos via text, Russell stated that he believed one of the individuals depicted was Kobe Bryant. Defendant Russell similarly made false statements in a memo he wrote on to the head of the Lost Hills station on January 30th, 2020. In the memo, Russell wrote, on 01/26/2020, while working as Unit 224T1, I shared photographs of the helicopter crash crime scene with other law enforcement personnel. I received the photographs from Deputy Joey Cruz, who was also working this incident via text. I sent 2 photos of the aircraft crash to a deputy in Santa Clarita Station. These statements implied that Russell shared the photos on the day of the accident with others who were working at the scene. However, Russell did not share photos with the deputy from the Santa Clarita Station while working on the day of the accident, January 26, 2020. Rather, Russell later admitted in an interview with department investigators that he texted photos of the victim's remains to the deputy who works at the Santa Clarita Station, a personal friend of Russell's who had no involvement in responding to the crash scene while off duty on January 28th, 2020, 2 days after the accident. In a memo addressed to the head of the Lost Hills station dated January 30th, 2020, defendant Versailles acknowledged that he sent crash scene photos to another member of the department, but claimed that the purpose of his sending and receiving the crash scene photographs was to answer some questions regarding the color, numbers, and identifying features of the aircraft, as well as crash scene details. Versailles doubled down on this position in a later interview with department investigators, stating that he shared the photos for purposes of identifying the helicopter. This was false. In an interview with department investigators, the officer to whom Versailles sent the photos stated that he received them during the evening of January 26, 2020, long after the helicopter had been identified, and there was no reason for him to receive them. Oh my God. Man. These guys, like it's bad enough that they shared them. It's bad enough that they may have taken these, or some of them received them and then shared them, but like shared them and then lied about it on top of it. Lied about it multiple times. This is an opening statement that writes itself, right? Like I can just see it. I can just see it. It's going to be a very emotional trial for sure. And it's going to be very difficult for the jury to not be swayed by all of these details. The Los Angeles Times reveals additional details regarding a deputy's misconduct. Although nowhere mentioned in the department's investigative report, in November 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that the sheriff's department had moved to discipline an unnamed deputy for broadly sharing photos of the victim's remains on his personal cell phone. The reporting cited the sheriff's department disciplinary summary for the third quarter of 2020, which states that a deputy stored confidential photographs of a multi-agency investigation on a personal cellular phone and shared the photographs with friends, family members, and coworkers on multiple occasions. The deputy defendants shared photos of the Bryant's remains with multiple people, including members of the public, without any legitimate purpose. As detailed above, each of the deputy defendants showed a willingness to take and or retain possession of photos of the Bryant's remains on their personal cell phones without any legitimate governmental purpose, demonstrated a morbid curiosity in the photos, exhibited a willingness to share the photos with others, including through electronic transmission without any legitimate governmental purpose, displayed consciousness of guilt by making false exculpatory statements regarding the photos, and destroyed evidence of their possession and sharing of the photos despite an obligation to preserve it. Based on the foregoing, plaintiff is informed and believes and thereon alleges that in addition to the specific instances of improper sharing detailed above, the deputy defendants each shared photos of the Bryant's remains with multiple people, including members of the public, without any legitimate governmental purpose. California enacts a criminal law against improper photos of human remains. In September 2020, responding to the sheriff department's gratuitous taking and sharing of photos of the crash victims' remains, the California state government enacted Assembly Bill 2655. Known informally as the Kobe Bryant Act of 2020, the law makes it a misdemeanor for a first responder, including a law enforcement officer, to photograph the remains of a crime or accident victim for any purpose other than an official law enforcement purpose or a genuine public interest. As explained by the California legislator who authored the new law, our first responders, when responding to an emergency, should not be taking very sensitive photographs for their own pleasure. Good. I'm glad to see some silver lining here, right? This is a law that should have been enacted a long time ago. It sucks when it takes a horrible situation like this. And yeah, T in Tennessee. Well, this heart breaks me. Imagine how often it happens with families that don't know. Yeah, I agree. I'm sure that this has happened many times, and there are probably many people that just have no idea. But should have been a law a long time ago, but I'm glad that it is now. Mrs. Bryant had suffered severe emotional distress. Mrs. Bryant has suffered and continues to suffer severe emotional distress from the knowledge that images of her husband's and daughter's remains were taken and shared for the perverse gratification of law enforcement officers, and she fears that she and her family may confront the appalling photos at any moment on the internet. This fear is eminently reasonable in light of the prevalence of cloud storage, such as iCloud and Google Photos, text messaging, and social media applications, through which photos can be stored and shared almost instantaneously and sometimes inadvertently. When Mrs. Bryant sought assurances from the sheriff's department that it had taken reasonable measures to control the spread of the photos, including whether it had confiscated and or inspected the electronic devices of the personnel who had or have photographs of the crash scene or victims' remains, the department refused to offer any response whatsoever. And at no point has the department taken even the basic investigatory step of collecting a forensic image of the offending individual's electronic devices. Mrs. Bryant's fear has been exacerbated by the fact that despite knowing about the photos within days of the crash, Sheriff Villanueva took none of the steps that a reasonable supervisor, let alone a highly trained professional investigator, would take to prevent dissemination of harmful photos in his constructive possession. As a result of Sheriff Villanueva's offer to his deputies that they could avoid investigation and discipline by deleting the evidence of their misconduct, Mrs. Bryant must live with uncertainty regarding how many photos were taken, whether they remain stored on the cloud, whether and how they were shared via text message, email, or social media applications, and whether people to whom the deputies transmitted the photos continue to possess them. Absent this information, it is impossible to rule out that the photos will surface and go viral online. This uncertainty has caused Mrs. Bryant severe stress and anguish. Mrs. Bryant's anxiety has been reinforced by widespread discussion of the photos online. In March 2020, Mrs. Bryant encountered an Instagram user who stated that she had seen pictures of Kobe and Gianna's bodies at the accident scene, and numerous Twitter users made similar statements even before the Los Angeles Times publicized that department personnel had taken and shared improper photos of the victims' remains. Other online commenters, along with the National Enquirer tabloid publication, have claimed that images of Kobe and Gianna's remains are being bought, shared, and or sold on the dark web. Oh, God. That's awful. These accounts are eminently plausible in light of the sheer number of deputies who took and shared photos of the Bryant's remains and the department's grossly inadequate steps to prevent their dissemination. For the foreseeable future, Mrs. Bryant and her family will almost certainly continue to encounter claims that photos of their loved ones' remains are circulating online, and they will have no way of knowing whether such claims are true or false. Avoiding thoughts of the sheriff's department's misconduct has been impossible, as Mrs. Bryant is repeatedly reminded of it online. Online trolls have exploited the tragic circumstances and the sheriff's department's misconduct for the purpose of taunting and hurting Mrs. Bryant. Ugh. These experiences provide a constant reminder that photos of her husband's and daughter's remains may be circulating in the public realm as a result of the sheriff's department's gross misconduct. God, that's awful. Mrs. Bryant served a notice of claims in accordance with the Government Claims Act. Okay, this is basically just like an administrative procedure kind of section. So, yeah, that was a tough read. That was a tough read to get through all of that. But I think it's important to go through because without the New York Times article, without that guy that made a complaint, without these different pushes for this to be made public, this issue, it seems like no one would have known. And this would have just continued on. This sort of behavior would have continued on. Now, there are several arguments that the opposing side has made through various filings. One, for example, is that there was no like wide dissemination, right? There was no disclosure to like the media, for example, that no one sent these images to the media. No one posted these on the internet. All they did was shared it internally, and then a couple people shared it by showing it outside of the department, what have you. Their argument is that case law is what supports the argument that the behavior that should have liability would be crossing that line to sending it to the media, sending it to posting it on the internet, but that like sharing it within the department is not enough to be to constitute liability under these circumstances. I'm personally not convinced. I think that and the court so far has not been convinced of that argument either, because they dismissed the defendant's motion for summary judgment, arguing exactly that. Basically, like whole cloth said, like the court's response to the motion for summary judgment, where the defense was trying to get rid of the lawsuit. The court's order normally will go through in detail of like, this is why one side wins, this is why one side loses, here's my reasoning. But it basically like, so like, here's the standard for a motion for summary judgment, and then like a very short paragraph at the end of like, oh, and we're denying it entirely, we're denying the motion for summary judgment entirely because of all of the reasons that were in the opposition. Like super quick, like nope, your arguments fail, that's it. So, yeah. Another argument that they're trying to make is that her damages are not like, she hasn't alleged proper damages to say that, what we just read through was that she says that she's concerned about future dissemination. She thinks that, she's got she sort of lives with this anxiety that there could be a public dissemination of these photos, that people are supposedly selling it on the black market, that this is all a possibility. Like, so what the argument from the other side has been is that they say that, you cannot have liability where the damages are just a mere possibility of harm, right? And that is true. That is true, that the law, there is plenty of case law that says that there has to be an actual harm that has existed. I think in this particular case, in addition to that concern for future harm, is the fact that there already has been, I think, an emotional harm that has come out by knowing that the images of their remains of their loved ones has been shared in this kind of humorous, sort of cheap way. So it'll be interesting to see how the defense comes up and plays this during trial, because this is a civil case. This is for negligence, violations of privacy, constitutional issues. There's several different causes of action, like I said. But it's a civil case. It's not a criminal case. But so far, the messaging that has come out from Vanessa Bryant's attorneys has been that she has no interest in settling. It's because she wants to send a message. She wants to enact change. I get it. Reading through this complaint, I get why she doesn't want to settle a case like this. I also get why the defendants would totally want to settle a case like this, because who wants any of those facts to get in front of a jury? Now, another issue that they're sort of dealing with right now is trying to figure out, the court said in the last hearing, I believe it was last week, that the judge was talking about possibly bifurcating the case because it's currently in federal court. And the judge was talking about bifurcating. There's one constitutional claim, and then there's the negligence claims, and then the violation of privacy claims. So the court was talking about bifurcating, splitting those up into multiple cases to make it easier on the jury to look at the causes of action and to determine liability or non-liability. Now, what would happen then is that the constitutional issue would stay in federal court and the rest of them would go to state court. Vanessa Bryant probably really wants that to happen. And here's why. It's because when you are talking about a federal case and a state case, they have slightly different jury pools. A federal case has a much wider jury pool. A state case has a much smaller jury pool, and it is much smaller in geography. In other words, you have probably the most famous and beloved Laker of all time, a case about the circumstances following his death, with a jury pulled from people that are right from Laker Town, right? That's a pretty favorable jury pool for Vanessa Bryant to pick from. And I can understand why the LA County Sheriff's Department would not want that jury pool necessarily, because, well, cops in LA have a certain reputation, or I don't know about reputation, but, certain public image, right? Among people in LA. It's a lot more difficult to find somebody that is going to be favorable for them. And especially to find someone that is unfavorable to Kobe Bryant and favorable to the LA County Sheriffs. That's a pretty tough road for them. So I understand why they would not want to split those up. Let me grab this comment before it slips away. Kai and Hi, thank you for being a member. Says Legalbytes, will this be all or nothing to win the civil suit, or can she win on each count separately? She can win on each count separately. She's got multiple opportunities to win here. So I'll briefly go through. So the first cause of action is against the sheriff's department, the fire department, and the county. So that's the constitutional violation of right to privacy, specifically the right to control the physical remains, memory, and death images of her deceased husband and child. So that's the constitutional issue that's there. And then we've got the second cause of action against the deputy defendants. So this is negligence, basically saying they had a duty not to share these images in the way that they did. They breached that duty by sharing the images in the way that they did. And by doing so, that caused her harm, the harms that we read through that whole paragraph about her dealing with the emotional harm, dealing with, the anxiety that this is going to crop up in the future. They created this likelihood that this is going to happen. So that's what she says. And then there's the negligence cause of action against the entity defendants, meaning the departments, the sheriff's department, the fire department, basically saying their policies, they should have had policies in place and they didn't for the handling of photographs at this kind of a scene. Now, then there's the invasion of privacy against Joey Cruz, talking about sharing photos of accident victims' physical remains without any legitimate governmental purpose is offensive and objectionable to a reasonable person of ordinary sensibilities. Yeah, yeah. And then invasion of privacy against the entity defendants. Again, talking about the policy. And then there's the prayer for relief. So that is the end of that one. Now, I will say, before we get out of here, there is one more thing here. Give me 1 second here. Just want to make sure. I always like to try to crop out ads. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here. Boppity boopity, talk amongst yourselves. Okay. So from Long Crime Network, there is this one here that says Vanessa Bryant fights to keep Instagram posts, including Cruella de Vil revenge image, away from jury in civil suit against LA County. So this is where trial sucks, right? Because all kinds of different images can come up. So now that they are talking about what kind of evidence is going to be, they've got these pretrial motions right now, right? That are being filed in the case, and what they're doing is, so they have the ability to do this. They have it's legitimate, right? Anytime someone is alleging emotional harm, they can dig into their social media and they can say, well, you are going to, where is this? The Hotel to Cap Eden Rock. I apologize to all my French speakers. I can't pronounce French as well as I can pronounce Espanol, etc. Then, she's over here. She's in Saint Jean Cap Ferrat. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that well enough, and I apologize. But she's socializing, she's having fun, she's out with the kids, she's going skiing, all this kind of stuff. Then this is the one that seems to be particularly spicy. There's a couple images here about her dressed up on Halloween as Cruella de Vil. And she posted on Instagram, a quote. She's got, this photo of herself dressed up, and then she's got this one as well, dressed up. And she's got some quotes that go with it, where she says, they say there are 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Well, I'd like to add one more: revenge. And that's a quote from Cruella from the movie that came out last year or something like that. And then she says here, there's another quote also from the movie. Well, now, what have we here? So they thought they could outwit Cruella. And the thing is, these are likely going to be introduced at trial. These are likely going to be put in front of a jury. Number one, lavish vacations to say, oh, okay, she claims that she's emotionally distraught, et cetera, but yet she's on these fancy beaches with her kids. She's out skiing in whatever mountains. She's out in France and all these other places, doing, going to all of these places and having fun. And so how much emotional harm is she really suffering? Number one. And number two, how much of that can actually be drawn to the actual sharing of whatever images within the department or to a few people outside the department anyway. I have to say, I would recommend, assuming anyone is watching, I would recommend treading very carefully on something like that, because anytime you have a grieving spouse, parent, or child, and you want to try to make them look bad for trying to do things to alleviate their grief, especially when you have someone that has the resources to go on vacation to try to, I don't know, escape their grief, escape their everyday life or something. I think that even where you have the everyday person that says, I don't have those resources, I don't have that kind of wealth, people are going to understand that. So if you try to play this off as, oh, she's just doing this for revenge, she's not doing this for proper purposes, you may very well have people on the jury saying, good. So that can really backfire very quickly. At the same time, you can also have jurors that look back at the department and say, who the hell are you to say how this woman should grieve? You know what I mean? So I see that this is all being introduced as it happens in these kinds of cases. It's basically inevitable for these kinds of cases to have these sort of social media images, and that's why for most people, like any clients that I've ever had in litigation, my recommendation has generally been put your stuff on private. Don't make it super easy for people to glean anything from your social media stuff because they will use your vacation photos against you. Um, but someone like Vanessa Bryant is going to have a public image no matter what, right? So, you can't necessarily give her that kind of advice. And at the same time, what are you going to tell her? Don't live your life? Sit and be depressed at home all day, every day when you've got other kids to watch after and to raise and to try to have them move on and try to live your life. You can also still be carrying that grief with you when you're on vacation. It's like it reminds me of, have you guys ever seen this one Saturday Night Live sketch where there's like a travel company that's from like New Jersey that's like run by Italian Americans that are like, "Hey, we're going to take you to Rome. You're going to see this and that and this and that. But we need to tell you that if you're sad at home and you're a sad person and you take yourself out of your home and you put yourself in Italy, you're still going to be sad. We can't control that." There's like a whole long sketch that actually was really funny. But like you can be sad on vacation. You can be sad on a very lavish vacation. There's something about that probably won't go away for a long time, regardless how you try to move forward with your life. So I would very much caution from trying to use those images against her because I don't know that that's going to be a winning strategy. But I do understand their desire to try to use whatever cards they can litigation wise, considering the facts that appear to be coming out. Assuming now, I know that not all of the specific details in the complaint are correct. For example, like I said about the niece of one of the individuals, she didn't actually see the image because she said that she didn't want to see it. So, but he apparently tried to show it to her, according to what came out in the deposition. But if a lot of this is true, and I suspect that a lot of it is, um, there's a lot of bad facts here for the department to be dealing with. So, Eva Lynn, thank you so much for your super chat. It says, people take a snapshot and try to create a story. What's a pic? A second. Plus, when you have kids, you have to push through and cry in the shower or in bed. 100%. 100%. Moms do not get a day off. Dads do not get a day off. Spouses do not get a day off from each other. I mean, I don't know. I guess you in that situation, you can have your alone time. But like when you are a parent, when you are a grieving mother and you have an infant as an example, I can't remember if their youngest, if she had even given birth to their youngest before he died, or if the baby was born like right before or something. But I remember that their youngest was very, very, very young. Yeah, it's you got to push through. And also, she has a public persona. There could be other reasons why she's posting photos of their trips elsewhere, right? It's not just to show like, "Oh, hey, I'm super happy and everything's great right now." It's also because social media is monetized these days. It could very well be that that's a source of income for her. I don't know. I haven't looked at her social media, but that's a possibility. So, yeah, no, Evelyn, you're absolutely correct. So, also, Secret McSquirrel, I'm very sorry to hear what you said about I lost my daughter 18 years ago. I'm still grieving. It never goes away. I'm very sorry to hear that. That is insanely difficult and yeah, grief is weird. It's really weird. It It can come and go in waves. It can show up in weird ways, weird behaviors. And it's, yeah. Sabs McDabs. I lost my dad at the end of last year and I still forget he's gone sometimes. Our brains do weird things in grief. Yes. Brains do very weird things. Yeah. Yeah. So Kai and I completely agree. My heart goes out to all the chat currently grieving. Yes. I didn't mean for this live stream to turn into such a sorrowful event, but it's true. Like sometimes we do need to talk a little bit about these kinds of things, right? Because it's a very human thing. And dealing with grief, it's hard. It's weird. Everyone goes through it at some point. And yeah, it's no two people grieve exactly the same way. I would say also. So it's one of the conclusions that I reached from working in trusts and estates and probate litigation. Some people need to be really sad. Some people need to eat. Some people need to shop. Some people need to fight and continue fighting for as long as they can. And there are some people post on social media. Some people get out of town. Some people use their resources, which she has every right to use her resources, right? I mean, one of the things that we learned in the Johnny Depp trial is that someone, a party to a lawsuit who has immense wealth can in fact end up at the other end of that lawsuit or the other end of that trial with the jury saying, you know what? You own an island and that's okay. I'm not going to hold that against you. So for someone to use her resources to satisfy her grief, I think it's entirely possible for people to sympathize or empathize with that. Anyway, if you found this live stream interesting or informative, I would appreciate it if you would like the video. It would be great. Also, if you want to hear more about this case as it develops, I mean, there's more to it, right? There was a whole motion for summary judgment argument that came and went. Like I said, I already gave the conclusion. The court ended up not siding with the defense on their motion for summary judgment. But there is likely to be more that comes out on this story before it gets to trial. So if you guys are interested in hearing more, let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. I want to try to bring content that is most interesting to you guys. So yeah, and this is one that is the more I dig into it, the angrier I get. But yeah, I really do feel for her. In terms of the law, we will see. I am so far, I think I'm leaning towards the Bryant side. But we will see how things shape up. But anyway, okay. Thank you guys. Hug and kiss your loved ones. Tell them you love them. I guess that's the best way to conclude this one, because we are all here for only a certain amount of time. And I love every single one of you for hanging out and for talking about this and going through a tough topic. So anyway, maybe give your family and friends a phone call that you haven't in a little while. Give them a phone call and tell them how much you appreciate having them in your life. Anyway, on that note, I will see you guys in the next video.